Tere tulemast kuulama Väikse Vankri podcasti. Mina olen Anna-Liis, olen kirjastuse Väike Vanker tegevjuht ning mul on hea meel, et oled meiega täna ühinenud. Eelmises saates rääkisime teemadel sekspositiivsus, seksuaalnõustamine ning märtsikuus ilmunud raamatust Saamise, andmise, kunst, Nõusolekuratas. Tänane saade on eriline. Oleme külla kutsunud Ondra Veltruský, kes on Nõusolekuratta töötoa sertifitseeritud koolitaja ning somaatiline seksi-coach. Saate eesmärk on mõista, mis on somaatiline ehk kehaga seotud teraapia, milles kirjutatakse raamatus Saamise ja andmise kunst ning kes võiks selle lugemises kasu saada. Mis on nõusolekuratas, kuidas seda saamise ja andmise kunstis kasutatakse ning mis rolli mängib selles kõiges nõusolek. Ondra on Saksamaal kasvanud tšehh, mistõttu on tänane osa inglise keeles. Eesti ja ingliskeelsed subtiitrid leiad vajadusel YouTube'i videoseadete alt. Head kuulamist! Okay, let's start with the most important part, which is our guest. So, hello, Ondra. Could you please introduce yourself and your work with your own words?
Yeah, thank you very much, Annalise. Thank you very much for the invitation. My name is Ondra Veltruský. I'm a Berlin-based sex coach, somatic sex coach, and we love consent facilitator. And I have two major pillars of my work. One is individual sessions, where I work individually with clients, and the other is workshop. And these days it's mostly we love consent workshop, and I teach it mostly in Germany, in many different cities, but also in Brussels in English, and in Czech Republic in Czech, and maybe in other countries in the near future as well.
When I was researching you and your work, of course, most of the information I got from your website, and it stated there that you have a master's degree in sociology, philosophy, and English and American literature, which is a lot. So could you please tell me, how did you get from like this academic field into body-based work?
Yeah, that's correct. I studied sociology, English and American literature and philosophy in Constance, Lake of Constance, in Germany, also in Canada, in Toronto, at York University. And there are many subjects, and I was very interested in society. That's why sociology was my major, and philosophy, also it's always interesting, having deep philosophical questions and try to sort of make sense of the world. And also literature was very useful, because literature can be very creative and also describes human interaction, right, in a varieties of ways, and the human nature. And after that, I did all kind of different other things. But at some point, I came back to the human, to the idea of trying to work with people more on a personal level. And I also learned that intimacy and sexuality can be a very interesting source, of knowledge or truth about ourselves. But I also learned that it seems to be quite important that we don't, go too fast, that we don't sort of jump with our, decide, oh yes, sexuality, sex is great, let's do it. But so we go slow, so we can approach these topics in a more like conscious and slow ways. And I learned that it seems to be a very good idea to start with consent, actually, and to start with the topic of trauma awareness, consent, embodiment. So first, feel your body first, feel your emotions first before you interact. And all these things were also missing in my first trainings, so that I learned it sort of in a hard way. And that's why consent became one of my focuses, and I still think that it's a really useful first step.
I guess the easiest way to introduce yourself would be by, of course, titles. So I could say that you are an official Wheel of Consent workshop facilitator, or you are a somatic sexual coach. So what does it actually mean to be a somatic sexual coach? And also, what does the word somatic mean? Because I have to be honest, this was a new word for me as well when I was first introduced to Betty's book.
Yeah, thank you for the question. It's very common and people are confused by the word. And well, somatic basically means body focused or body based. What it means is that it can include touch. That's the way I use it. It can include touch, but it does not have to. And the wheel of consent is a great tool of figuring out, do you actually want touch? And if yes, what kind of touch? And but even sort of steps before that, it's a focus of how do you feel in your body. So it's less like talking about issues, like what do you think, you do this and that, or like kind of talking therapy, which is still, I think, still most common way of psychotherapy. And somatic work is asking more questions like, yeah, how do you feel it, and where do you feel it? If you feel it, where do you feel it? And are you able to feel it? And then what kind of interaction or touch or sexuality do you wish? So it tries to include the body. And one of the things which most people can relate to is the so-called gut feeling, right? It's like not deciding with your mind, because the mind is great for many things. It can bring us to the moon and further. Now we had the Artemis 2 circling around the moon, which is, quite a milestone for humankind. But if it's used for choices, it's not always great, because it's easy to give us, 500 reasons to do one thing and 500 reasons to do other thing. So that's why I invite people, to basically to feel their gut, to try to listen to their body. And it doesn't mean that the body gives you exact and correct answers always, but I think it's a good question to ask. And then there's many reasons why people have difficulties to do that.
It's very interesting. I mean, like usually when you think of like therapy, you go there because you have a problem. You go to physiotherapy because some kind of physical trauma happened to you, or when you go to talk to your therapist, then you have some difficulties in your life that you're trying to work through, and then you are a somatic therapist. Maybe I could call you. Could I call you a somatic therapist as well?
Well, I don't call myself therapist, because at least in Germany, it's not protected. It's only like physiotherapy and psychotherapy is protected. You need a certain way of education for it. But for me, therapy is often connected with some different approach and with something is kind of wrong with people, at least some. So I found like to call it myself a, sex coach or somatic or body-based sex coach more interesting. Of course, knowing that being a coach also has not always a good reputation, the word coach. There's yes. all kind of coaches, which, some of the coaching is useful, some is not. So it's tricky. But yeah, you could say it's like a somatic therapy, yes.
Okay, so I guess what I was trying to get to is just like, when we go to like physiotherapists or our therapists to talk to, then we usually have like a known problem or ailment that we can maybe see, or I don't know, whatever we have going on with our minds. But when you said that you help others, you teach others to feel touch, or feel, I guess, pleasure through touch. That's like really interesting thing to do, or it's just an interesting profession, because you don't have many of those.
Yeah, that's totally correct. And I often experience that sometimes like people say, well, and it does not have to be always touch. It's more like, is this sometimes longer and sometimes shorter way. Sometimes it takes years before any touch actually happens. So sometimes it is a lot of talking. And some people say, I can't really talk about any sexual with my friends or even with my psychotherapist. So many people come who have psychotherapy at the same time, but for some reason they say they don't feel comfortable, or the therapist doesn't feel comfortable talking explicitly about sexual things. So one of the reasons, and people can, basically ask anything and be very explicit, talk about their genitals and honestly talk about anything they want. Yeah, and I just believe it's like with like you say, we have so many, kind of, ways, therapies, doctors for all other kinds of issues, but around sexuality, I mean, I don't want to generalize, but still it is often sort of problem-based or illness-based, disease or dysfunction, also like horrible word. We have all these things where it's like this and that. I don't want to even say it, like dysfunction. And I try to look at, and it, of course, there can be dysfunction, there can be very medical issues which need to be fixed by medical professionals or medicine or even like, operations or something. But many of the issues around sexuality are actually kind of consent-based, basically negotiating what can be done and that nothing is wrong with people. It's just we haven't learned it to really be open and ask things and also say yes, but also say no, and having access to both. Also ask for desire.
What kind of clients usually come to you? What are they having difficulties with?
Well, it's very diverse and it's very, very individual, but some of them come with a question like, how can I feel safe again during intimacy, during sexual interaction? And it doesn't always have to be that they had some horrible experience or sexual violence or abuse. It happens a lot as well, but some just don't feel for some reason able to care for themselves or communicate, or if they do communicate, their partner or partners don't really listen or shame them for their boundaries. So they come to practice communication around these topics, sort of improving communication and consent skills, basically. Some come practicing asking for what they want. Other is like, how does it feel that the touch is just for them? Some say even like, I never had that, the feeling that this touch is just for them, because they always feel like the partner is touching in the way you want in the beginning, but then it sort of shifts and they have no really tools or skills to communicate it. And that's basically what the wheel of consent is about. I'm sure we will talk about it a little bit more like later, more specifically, that how can we negotiate what we want to do. And some people, they just come to experience pleasure on their body or pleasure on genitals, which is also quite unique modality. This that I sort of, the way I work is, it's always a question, is touch something which people really want? So there's a sometimes long process, like how do we get to touch at all? So it's always this as a possibility of touch. I don't heal through touch. It's more people heal, like sometimes experience it as healing, that they get the touch exactly which they want, right? Because maybe you've heard it before, many people heard it before, this, touch is healing, but I think only touch you really want is healing. Can be healing,
true.
right? And then there's like these steps. So where would you like to be touched? And then people are in this thing like, shame often comes, and then we deal with shame first and with nudity first before anything else. So I try to do really slow and as trauma sensitive as possible.
What is one common misunderstanding people have about your work? I really like to ask this question, and I would also already like to offer a misunderstanding, if I may.
Yeah, please, totally.
If I hear the word sex coach or sexual coach, my mind often goes to like, they are people who teach other people how to have sex, but it's not that they teach consent and the feeling of being safe around people. It's that they teach techniques. And I think Betty often mentioned in the book as well that technique is the last thing you should think about. It's how you feel with other people and with your own body, that the techniques are not what makes or breaks the experience in the bedroom and outside of it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think when I remember right, Betty Martin doesn't she write something like, what has the wheel of consent to do with sex? And she's like, nothing really, right? Like kind of radical. And then she kind of clarifies, well, not necessarily. So that's why also one of the reasons the Wheel of Consent workshops, at least how I teach and how it's taught by Betty Martin's School of Consent, is like we stay clothed, so there's no nudity, because it has shown that it's just not necessary to teach the core of consent. And if nudity or even like some kind of intimate touch is added, it usually people tend to forget everything they learned about consent. When people start, it's usually just better to start in a non or less sexual and clothed way. Well, the other misunderstanding, what comes to my mind, is that people think I will, fix their issue in a few hours. That I tell them what to do, and that's just not how I work as a coach. So I'm always honored this desire, and often they kind of smile, and sometimes they even cry. It's like such a great and valid wish that you come somewhere and somebody makes your problems go away. I mean, right? Amazing. So the desire that it works like that is totally valid, but and I'm not saying there might be other people who can do that. It's just not me. So I support them that they figure out what's going on and they can take care for themselves, because I'm not present at their sexual interactions in the future either, right? So, and as you said, it's a little bit of a dilemma to, the word, because ideally I would not use the word sex at all.
Yeah.
But it has, shown that if I say I'm somatic coach, nobody understands the focus.
Maybe you should say consent coach.
Yeah, but then also consent is not everybody knows what consent means. And often, like, the way when I say sex or sexuality, for me it includes all kind of, variety of sexual interaction, which can include like intercourse, but it doesn't have to at all. So there's so many other things, all the field of, BDSM and kink and whatever, which, and does not have to be even nudity, but probably also depending, which country and which sort of society or culture people are in, sex, when it just stands alone, often or most of the time, maybe people think about sexual intercourse. And yeah, so I also try to change that, sometimes just because we are in this topic, sometimes people say like, I have pain during some activity. And I ask, so why do you, I do it a little bit slower than now, but I was like, why do you do something where you have pain? And they're like, oh, wow, that's right. They're kind of surprised. It just doesn't come to their mind that they could also stop and move away and take a break or pause.
Yeah, I'd say like in Estonia as well, when you say the word consent, your mind goes straight to sex, because we have like, nõusolekuratas. It's basically like the law that regulates how old you have to be to have consensual sex. I don't know what's the law, what would it be in English? Since nõusolek is in the word nõusolekuratas, or I don't know, the law of consent, then I think that's where the connection has become in Estonian. But it's important to know that consent is not only a priority in the bedroom.
Yeah, exactly.
It has to be, priority everywhere else with all the relationships that you have.
Yeah,
is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
But sadly, that's where our minds go when we talk about consent in Estonia.
And I think you publish also like a book around sex positivity, right?
I didn't publish it, but I just talked about it. It's a good book.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I think the way I try to work is to sort of, one way normalize that it doesn't have to be anything. So it's like, sex can be with clothes on and without penetration and without something specific in mind. At the same time that it can be everything if we all consent, right? So it's nothing, it's right and wrong. It's more like, can we agree? What do we do? And also, some people say like, well, in a workshop, let's not do sexual touch. And I'm like, is it really clear what it means? Because I think, and it's sometimes what people mean by that we don't want to go and increasing, let's say, arousal and increasing sexual energy, right? But at the same time, if somebody touches my arm in a very gentle, soft, slow way, it can be very, very erotic for me, right? And it can be very, very erotic experience for me in my body. And I don't think it's right sort of to tell people what they should feel in their body when they are touched in a certain way. At the same time, even if no touch is included, let's say go with somebody for a walk, it can be very erotic. It can be very sort of very intense experience, right? Talking, smiling, walking, and maybe even more erotic experience than having intercourse. So what I know that there's like, people define these words in a certain way, and that's good that people try to define it. At the same time, I think it's interesting to look at it more like trying to agree on things and have to be on the same page than to include and exclude certain activities.
We had into our second part of this episode, why is sexuality and consent so confusing for people? So like coming back to Betty Martin's book as well, The Art of Receiving and Giving, the author, Betty, hopes that by reading the book and practicing, the reader will be able to know what they want and ask for it and hopefully experience it as well. But why do you think we have this problem to begin with? Like, why do you think people struggle so much with knowing what they want?
Well, it's a very good question, and there's actually exercise in the workshops which we ask people, like, why don't we ask for what we want? And then people, come up with things, and what is very interesting to me is that these things seems to be very, very similar around the world. So because these workshops are offered all over the world, these dynamics seem to be very, very common. So I don't want to say it's very individual. So I rather like ask people what is it for them. But some of the things which are always on the list, it's usually like people have, shame around it. They haven't learned it. They simply grew up in a culture or a family or a school where it was not welcome to ask for your want, or it was even like, sometimes it's framed like if I ask for what I want, it's egoistic. It's like, it's not, it's egoistic. We should think about the other. What people forget is that I believe that if it's about my body, I can, it's not egoistic to also take care of myself. And of course, we need to be negotiating if there's any interaction with others, right? So my freedom ends where it sort of disturbs the freedom of others. And this is a complicated topic, but in a general sense. One of the source why it's so difficult, I assume, is that many of us have watched movies, also as children and young adults. And at least when I grew up, the consent around intimate sexuality was not really a thing which the movies would reflect. So often sexuality just happens. Nobody really talks. Nobody asks. Quite often it's still sort of this, kind of heteronormative setting. And quite often, at least it used to be, that the man initiates and sometimes even the woman sort of resists for a while and then agrees anyway. It's a famous scene in Star Wars where was it Han Solo, kind of wants to kiss Leia, the Princess Leia, and she says no, and she's even, no, you're hurting me, and he somehow continues, and then she gives in, which is I think it's like a horrible example, and it's like a horrible learning, and then when you're young, you like these movie stars, and you think that's the way to do it, so you don't question it because they're the famous people, so that must be the way to do it. And I think it's not useful for all genders, because as a sort of man or a male identified person, you think, oh, this, I don't want it, but this is how I should act to be a real man, right? And as a woman or like, female identified person, you think, I actually don't like that, but this is what I should be doing in order to be considered like a Princess Leia, right? So this is very stereotypical now, but I think some of these things we kind of learn from movies, and not consciously, but that's how reality is created. We kind of repeat it, and of course, talking about sexuality, often porn is a source of education, and now even with internet, it's like you can find anything more or less. And I know there's great porn with where consent is included, and it's queer friendly. It's like it's there's a variety of porn movies, but the majority, I think, it's still like very very heteronormative and very very sort of in a way which just does not reflect the reality of most of us. So when you learn that, you think that's how people do it, but it simply does not reflect the reality. Having said that, of course, you can want to have sex like you see it in a porn movie if all agree, right? That's a consent thing again. So if of course you can do whatever you want if all people who are participating can really truly agree on it.
Yeah, I think the Princess Leia example was a good example. Like when you are young and you're watching this, you're like, oh, okay, that's how a woman acts and that's how a man acts. And now that we are wiser and we know better, we're just like, what the hell is this? Like, this is weird. And then you also mentioned stereotypes, and I feel like everybody nowadays knows the word stereotype, or like what it means to be a typically masculine man or a typically feminine woman. But knowing what these stereotypes are, I don't think that takes away the pressure to not act according to those stereotypes. Like I know what a feminine woman looks like or should act like, in quotes, of course. And I can feel anger that that's how I have to act to be viewed in a certain way. But that doesn't mean that I stop acting according to those stereotypes. So it's not gonna take us like 20 years to get rid of those stereotypes. It's gonna take a lot longer than that. And I think that starting with teaching consent is a very important step in breaking those social rules and stereotypes.
Exactly. And it takes very long. I think also, unfortunately, it takes very long to change these things. And I think sometimes there's all kind of ways, to make changes. Being activists, you can write, you can publish, as you do, publish books, and speak out and talk to people and friends, or you can do workshops. And sometimes it needs certain setting for these discussions, because you cannot always, as you probably know, it's not always easy to challenge people on their patterns on a street, right? Or even with friends. So that's why sometimes it's great to have when people come who really want to learn something new, so they come to certain events, and then they can be supported when it's not easy for them, because changing patterns, it's often not easy. It doesn't mean it's wrong to change the patterns. It's just the things we are used gives us safety, even if the pattern is not useful for us. So it's like this, this sentence like that. Try to figure out in English, like the known hell is sometimes easier than the unknown heaven, right? So then we stay also in, groups, cults, relationships, which are not good for us, but the fear of being alone is greater, so we just stay. I know it's very simplified,
but it's true.
Yeah. Thank you.
Let's talk a bit more about touch, because when you talk about consent, we could kind of just sit down in a circle and have like this theoretical discussion about what is consent, how to apply consent in work relationships or with friendships, whatever. But Betty has decided to teach consent through touch. And why is that? Like, why is talking not enough? Why do we need body-based and touch-based learning?
Yes, that's a very good question. I think it's a little bit, I talked about it before, like when I mentioned, the gut feeling. is that our mind is great for many things, but not always great for making decisions around consent. So there is the idea that, especially if it's about intimacy and sexuality, where it usually includes our body, that it's also useful to start with our body, to do the work, and not sort of make decision in our mind and then assume the body will follow. Because the body has sometimes its own sort of wisdom, and it can be conscious or unconscious. My kind of favorite example is when we are surprised, right? Then often, the body, there's kind of this short shock, and sometimes we even do a sound like, oh, we even with children when we play and we sort of play hide and seek, and then we just kind of the whole body moves, and that's exactly it. So the body reacts much quicker than the mind. Another example, something is flying to us, we kind of move away from it instinctively without thinking. If we would be thinking, it would be too late. And this is sort of before. I don't want to go deep to neuroscience, but it's like way before the thinking can actually kicks in. We have a body reaction. More like some like animals, more like they just react. Like the crocodile, they just, if it's dangerous, they go away, and if they feel they can attack, they attack. And it's not like they have a philosophical thinking around before. And we also do have that. So if we don't feel safe and people ask why, it's not always a great question. Like, why are you scared? So you can't really ask somebody, you can't really say, or you can say it, but it's usually not useful. Let's say, as an example, you go in the dark in the woods, and somebody in a group, and somebody say, "Oh, I'm scared in the dark." And then if you say, "Don't be scared, it's safe here," well, you were right. You notice, you laugh, and it is correct. You can't say it's safe here. You just scared. Period. And you even scared when you have company, and that's totally valid, and that's sort of your wisdom. And of course, you can, if you want, you can work on it. You can, you can sort of make it a big challenge to figure out why is it, because you want to change it, but you don't have to change it. It's just like it's this question: do you want to change things? But the first step is usually useful. Like, okay, do you actually notice that you don't want to be there? Right? That if you would prefer actually not to be there in this moment. And that's how, and so that's why in the Wheel of Consent workshop we usually start with touching objects. We call it waking up the hands. So and we touch objects for a few minutes, 3 minutes or more, and it's exercise, which leads us to the question: are we actually able to feel with our body? And in a similar way, we touch objects and play with the question: are we having pleasure or not? We don't have to, but it's more like a question. In a similar modality, we could be touching humans, and so there's this like different steps of learning, embodiment, which is also kind of a big word. Many people just don't know what it really means, but it's like the idea that it's useful to take your body along on this journey around consent. And it's always a question like, how easy is it for you to feel it? And also accepting if you don't feel it, there's many reasons where it just might be difficult not to feel it. I mean, difficult to feel it, yeah. So it might be easier not to feel it. It's also important. We don't have to breathe always more to feel more. There's valid reasons we choose not to feel anything. And also it's interesting because I had this example of, when we are surprised, we often stop breathing, like, and it's also a way of, it helps us somehow dealing with the reality at this moment.
Yeah, I also, when I first read the book, I also did the exercise waking up the hands, and it was kind of shocking when I first read the book. I was like, wait, what's going on? This book is telling me to touch an object. When you describe it, that's kind of the exercise. You sit down comfortably, so you don't have to think about anything else other than the object in your hands. And then you start, touching it and hopefully feeling some sensations, hopefully feeling pleasure, and then understanding that, wow, you can experience pleasure in so many ways. That doesn't have to be sexual, doesn't have to be with anybody else, doesn't have to have certain objects involved. You can just, I don't know, hold a pen and trace your hand with it and feel like, wow, oh my God, this is nice. And it's interesting that even that simple exercise made me like feel shame. Just like, why is it so hard to own feeling pleasure? So yeah, it was a really interesting exercise, and it was a good start to the reading journey, because it was really raised some interest, because that simple exercise was really like impactful. So we have been using the the wheel of consent a couple times now during this episode, and I think it's time to talk about it more, because Betty's book heavily relies on this tool or this model that she named the wheel of consent. And in the last episode, me and a soon-to-be sex counselor, Anna Josephine, tried to introduce the wheel of consent to our listeners, like why it's useful and how to use it. But we are only beginners, only rookies on the topic. So of course, I would like to talk about it again by asking questions from you, from the expert. So could you please explain to the listener, like, what is the wheel of consent and what do you do with it?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. Thank you. So, I mean, the wheel of consent is a model. It's an interactive model which explores communication, consent, interaction, and even relationships. And I thought, I was invited. There's also a Czech translation of Betty Martin's book, and I was invited to write a preface of the Czech translation. And I would like, because I sort of summarized, this in just a few sentences. So if I may, I'll just maybe read it and we can discuss it further. So what is the wheel of consent? Our capacity to perceive, express, and respect consent is deeply shaped by personal history, by experience, generational patterns, cultural context, and structures of power. The wheel of consent does not present itself as a manual. It is, rather, an invitation to embodied exploration. It offers a path through which we can feel, in our own bodies, what a freedom of choice, boundaries, and consent are like, and also what it is like when they are absent. It is not a technique, but an experience that emerges through touch, communication, and awareness of our own motivations.
Really nicely written. When you look at the wheel of consent, you can see that it has like these 4 sectors. Betty has named them quadrants. So you are, you're either giving a gift or you're receiving a gift, and then either you are doing something or you are being done to something, right? So that's how those 4 different quadrants are made up. Do you want to maybe go over those quadrants? So serving, accepting, taking, allowing, so people understand what is what exactly.
Yeah, I can do that. Yeah, the listeners have to know it's not easy to just explain it online or through audio. That's why it's one of the reasons, like, even sometimes people said, oh, we read the book, but we now need to practice it. So they either practice it with other people or they come to workshops. But of course, you can you don't need the workshop. You can read it from books or, watch videos or work with the diagram. So I'm just thinking how to summarize it. So you said, yeah, so I'm assuming now that, people who watching the YouTube video, they will see the diagram, and those who are listening to it, maybe, you will probably share like link to the diagram so they could get it for themselves. So there's sort of 4 different dynamics, and there's 2 different interactions. So the wheel of consent was created from practice. So it's not that Mette Martin, created this concept, this diagram, and then everything else was sort of followed, but she was, practicing with people and asking all kind of questions for many, many years. And then she noticed, there's a dynamic and there's certain dynamic where some people struggle. For some people it's easy, but she noticed certain dynamics, and out of these dynamics she created this diagram. And it started with two basic questions, and the one is, how would you like to touch me for your own pleasure? So it's a gift for you, and I'm offering my body. And for most people this is quite confusing, because very often we know that we touch somebody and it's for their own pleasure, right? Like, doing a massage. So offering my body to you, and then we negotiate what is your desire, and if you have one at all, and then you voice your desire, what you would like to do, how you would like to touch me, and then I take time to feel whether I'm willing to allow this touch. This is a very important step. So we welcome the desire, whatever it is, of course, always in the context of the certain setting, right? So in a workshop, we stay clothed on, we don't touch genitals, etc. If you do this exercise with, your partner or, whatever, it can include the whole world of sexuality. So it can be, what would you like to do to me or with me? And it doesn't have to be a few minutes. It can be much longer. And so this dynamic we call take and allow. So you're taking from my body and I'm allowing to take him, allowing the touch. And we often add the word gift, because so you are receiving the gift, because if we just say receiving, it can be very confusing what people actually mean. So because usually when you are touching me, most people think, well, then it's for me, right? As an example. But in this case, it's for you, because it's your wish, you decide. So that's sort of the take and allow dynamic. The other dynamic, which is usually more easy to understand for people, is we call it serve and accept. So it's like, would you like to have a massage? And then we negotiate what you like. And then again, I can also, have limits. So say, okay, I'm willing to do this kind of massage, but not the other one. And one of the reasons these words, these so-called quadrants, it may feel like that, that the wording is a bit weird or it's sort of artificial. And it is, because the idea was to make, use words which are a little bit different than when we usually say, do you want to have a massage, receive a massage? So there's a reason why these words are a little bit different. And I'm sure you have experienced the challenges with finding these words when you translated the book, right? It's not easy to translate, because these words have a certain meaning, but it's not, I think it's not so important to like say, okay, is it the right word? Is it the right translation? But more like, okay, do I understand what it means to be in a certain quadrant? So am I in the serving? If I offer you a massage, am I really serving for you? And is it really for you? Yeah, that's maybe, well, not in a very short way, but complicated way, and people probably have more question marks than before.
Yeah, probably it's not easy to describe what the wheel of consent is with like a couple of words, because it's just such a big, difficult idea to grasp, to handle. And I think, as you told me in the previous call we had, and also Betty has written in the book, is that many people start to understand the difference between giving and receiving at the end of the 3-day workshop. So like it takes a lot of time. It's not like you, I don't know, hold an object, wake up the hands, and then ask a couple of questions, and then you're done. Like for some people, it takes a lot of time.
Exactly. And it's like my experience, it's sometimes even like in waves. So, this is like this typical 2.5 or 3 day workshop. And sometimes, in the beginning, after one day or 1.5 days, people say, "Oh, no, I got it," and they do continue doing exercise, and they sort of lose it again. They go, "Oh, I thought I understood it, now I don't again." And it's like a waves, and it's like a dance. And also many people or many facilitators, even Betty Martin herself, say sometimes she learns, and we all learn new each time we play it. We play these games, the 3-minute game. Which is sort of basically the 3-minute game. I mean, why 3 minutes? Just a time where it's not long enough. It's long enough to learn something, but it's not too long to be uncomfortable if it's uncomfortable. So it's like, and it's kind of stuck, the name. So you can do it totally much longer. And each time with each individual, you often have learn something a little bit new about yourself, or notice something, and that's the whole beauty of it. So. Ideally people keep playing it with different people and notice things, and that's sort of how the workshop work, that we do these things, these games, this interaction, then we share how was it for you, or the people share between themselves, and then we share often in a big circle. So it's not like a moral concept which tells you what's right and wrong or what you should do. It's more like offering maybe clarity on things, and then people decide how much consent do they want to integrate in their lives.
So when people have not read the book, or they're not familiar with the model that is the wheel of consent, and they hear the word giving and receiving, then for them it's probably kind of like hard to understand, like, what do you mean you can mix up giving and receiving? Like, when you're giving, then you're giving somebody something, obviously. When you're receiving, then somebody else is giving something to you, right? Do you have any like examples that people where people get the giving and receiving like mixed up during those workshops?
Yeah, that's a very good question. What can happen that you change the quadrant, you change the dynamic without noticing it. So as an example, like we had this example, how would you like to touch me? And you say, let's say, I want to touch your hair for some reason, right? And also, what is also important, we don't ask the why. We try to normalize. It's none of my business to know why you want to do it. It's my business to allow it or not, to be clear what I'm allowing you. So it can be generally, kind of genuine desire just to touch my hair. It can be just, you just want to practice consent. It doesn't mean you like my hair or you like me necessarily, but maybe you just want to practice. And because sometimes people really need the why, they use the why, and they give meaning to the why, and then they make the decision depend on it, which is fine in the regular life. Like, they can do, of course, what they want. And if they say, well, before you touch my hair, I have to know you first for some reason. And knowing people sometimes means we have to talk about the weather, and then they have a feeling of trust. And this is fine. It's just interesting to reflect on that. So using the example, you're touching my hair, and I like it. I like it a lot. And then I would start to ask you, oh, could you do a little bit of that? And could you do, more pressure here? And I switch from allowing gift for you, I switch to it's now for me. And I want to make it a better experience for me. And if you're not sort of aware of it, maybe because also you often, or just, sometimes give a head massage for the other person, and you kind of have done that before, maybe. So it's natural that you do it how I want. And you start doing it how you want, and completely also forget, as I did, that it was actually for you, and that we were exploring something else. So we both sort of forget and switch the quadrants. And somehow when we realize it again, it's a big like confusion, like, oh, was it for you? No, it was for me. It's like a, kind of confusion. And this can happen, of course, when I was talking about, we're practicing wheel of consent in a workshop setting or in a setting of where you practice the concept. Sometimes it happened in everyday interaction. And there's a, example of which Betty Martin has in her book, which is not sexual at all, but it's like her husband asks, would you like to go to Victoria? I think was the example. So would you go other city? And she says yes. And then they're there and they basically figure out, well, nobody wanted to be there, but he thought he's doing her a favor. And she thought she's doing him a favor because he wanted to go. So this can be applied, on completely non-sexual things, but it can be also if it's around sexuality. It's like, and some even if we don't talk about it, right? If we don't talk about it, we just start to engage sexually. And then one of the person thinks, well, it's not really that great, but the other person probably likes it, so I'm gonna go along. It's not horrible. It's just kind of not what I would choose today. I chose it yesterday, but not today. And the other person thought things because, I'm just doing it for the other person. And then there might be confusion when it turns out that nobody actually wanted this. Yeah. So, and so this is sort of one connected. And I also mentioned is like, so this can be misunderstanding that pleasure means it's for me, or absence of pleasure means that it's for the other. So I always, in the workshops, I remind people, pleasure is welcome in all quadrants, in all dynamics. So just with the example of the hair, just because I like it, and it might give me great pleasure, it does not mean it's for me all of a sudden. It's still for you. And pleasure is more like a bonus, like a kind of benefit. Yeah, like a bonus.
Yeah, I guess the other important thing that we must think about is the way the gift moves. So
Yeah.
Am I the one who's getting the gift, or am I the one who's giving the gift to somebody else? And I think like when you think about the gift and then those actions like giving and receiving, then you can kind of understand the quadrants a bit more.
Exactly.
But if this audio version of us just discussing it is just so confusing, I really recommend just reading the book because it has been written really well and it has so many examples of how people get it wrong. So you know how not to get it wrong.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's like sometimes if it's difficult for us to have a clarity, we tend to sort of hide it behind like, we talk about flow or love and all these spiritual things, which are totally great, or energy. So nothing against flow, energy, and all that. But if we use it to get what we want, but sort of in a sneaky way, then it's maybe not so useful. And also, I always say in workshops, it's quite the wheel of consent. It's quite a kind of even radical. It's like a laboratory. In a radical way, we separate certain dynamics to learn them clear. Like when you start, dancing, learn dancing, or playing an instrument, music instrument. It's often quite sterile. You look at your feet and you go like left, right. When you play instrument, you go like you have to look, and sort of very slowly do like very kind of technical. You do one move, and once you learn dancing or playing instrument, you forget what you're doing. You don't watch your feet. You just do the move, and it's just in you. Or if you play an instrument, you can sort of intuitively play, and you can even talk or sing whatever, and you're not aware of what your fingers are doing anymore. And I think this with consent is similar. So if you learn the dynamics, if you learn them, usually it's a good to separate it, to make it very, very clear, slow down, and also be aware of the difficulties you're facing. And now once you learn it, you can mix it back together, and you don't have to ask each time, is it for me, is it for you, is it for us? Who is doing? It's like I say, if somebody is having sex for many hours and nobody complains, everybody is happy and bliss, then we don't need all that, right? It's not always you need to clarify things, because sometimes people think like, they feel threatened even by the idea of consent, because now it's restricting, right? They feel restricted. And I don't think that's what it is. I think it's more like making it clear, this is really practicing, and then you can mix it, and until it's like it can be good until it's not, right? It can be all great, and if we learn it, I think it makes it easier to interrupt any time. So this is one of the things I always remind people in sessions or in the workshops, like, you can stop and change your mind anytime. And this is a game changer for many people. Like, not the idea of it, because the idea, we often say like, oh, if you don't like it, just say no. But most of us know that's not easy, right? When you're in it, and especially when sort of, sexual energy arousal joins, or even like orgasm or these things, it's not easy to say, wait a minute, I actually don't like this anymore. I said yes before, and we can practice that this is received well, right? That the other people, because not always this is received in a nice way, right? If you stop and interrupt, it often creates emotions and resistance, or it can.
Yeah. Like when I was also reading the book, I also had the thought like, there's like so much talking, and when you're aroused, that kind of feels like when I have to ask, is this good? Are you enjoying this? That it's kind of like it's gonna ruin the feeling, the situation. But it's not like that at all. It's like, thanks to the wheel of consent and always asking and talking when you're still in the learning process, it just gives you the confirmation that your lines will not be stepped over, and you will not you will not be able to take advantage of somebody else, because you're always connected. You're not doing this on autopilot. You're talking. You're asking what's going on. And so I think it's definitely a misconception that asking and talking in the bedroom is gonna ruin something or not be sexy. Like, no.
And we can, often have an exercise in a workshop where we practice the no, right? And it's so hard for many people just to say no to things they actually want. Just like practice no and receiving the no, and it shows like, and then people like often realize, oh, that's why it's so hard for me, this whole topic of consent, because I want to be able to say yes with a full heart, but also say no. And if I can't access both in an equal way, then it limits me, right? If I cannot change my mind, then I rather not go at all to some situations. And I also think, as you said, if we practice, it does not have to ruin the magic or the moment, And I think coming back to the idea, to the movies, I think we learn it all from the movies, because that's how it's often portrayed in the movies. Things just happen and they go always well. I mean, of course, there's, violent movies and horror movies where it's not true, but when it's about like romantic, so it's always great, and nobody talks, nobody asks, everybody's happy. And then we just never learn to adjust, and we don't learn like that. And adjustment, it's not against us, right? It's not, I didn't do something wrong if somebody who I'm interacting with adjusted to make it even better for them. But I think this is new sometimes, right?
Yeah. We have talked about the book and how important the practicing part is to actually use the wheel of consent in your daily life in whichever situations. So it could be maybe easy for some people to understand it just by reading it and then just by practicing it in their daily lives. But it could be, for some, it could be quite difficult. So for those people, I guess we could recommend going to a workshop.
Yeah.
And you are, one of the people who facilitate the official workshop of the Wheel of Consent. So what do you do? What do people do in the workshop? And what do they learn during those 2.5 days?
I mean, I think I said it before. I would say like worship is one of the things to learn it. I'm not saying you have to do worship in order to learn it. You can certainly, and some people learn it just from the book. And there's also many videos by Betty Martin about these things, and articles. And if people practice it, usually it's really useful to practice it. Just reading it and doing theory doesn't usually work well. But if you read a book and practice these exercises with others, you can you don't need a workshop. But often people come to the workshop because they say, well, they don't know so many people there they are interested in. And it can be awkward. And it can be like that, people don't understand the way these exercises are done. And then they, have an argument about it. What's the right and wrong way? So yeah, some people prefer the workshop. So you're asking like what's happening usually in these 2.5 days, right? Yeah. So how to summarize it? So it's there's some little homework before I send an email where people are invited to some somatic homework if they want to, and then it's sort of a introduction through waking up the body a little bit, like feeling into their bodies, and then we share about our names and pronouns and how we feel, and it's usually creates a sort of a feeling of connection and safety, or as safe as possible. I mean, I cannot guarantee safe space. I don't say this is a safe space, because that's up to the people to decide whether they feel safe or not. But it's sort of the slow way of getting to know each other and not to do anything usually makes most people comfortable. And then we start touching objects. And again, so this is this idea of choice. People choose objects and then they reflect on it. And then we continue with the opportunity to touch each other's hands. So we first touch hands, and again, it's a process of who do I want to work with, and how easy is it to ask people. So this is all these micro things happening where we then discuss in a big circle. Like, it's some say, it was very easy to know. Some say, it was really hard for me to ask to work with the person I liked, and and then people sort of share what they learn. What they're learning, and at some point people have the opportunity to touch the whole body. Again, we stay clothed on, we don't touch genitals, and also no penetrate any bodily holes, so no fingers in the nose. And I also say it's nothing against nudity, and also nothing against body holes, and nothing against genitals. It's just not I haven't announced it that way, so that's why we don't do it. Because as we talked before, it's, if we add these things, which can be great workshops where it's done differently, but it's, for most of us, a little bit more difficult to focus on the basics. If it gets too juicy, too sexual, I'm not saying it's not possible, but it's just often more challenging to focus on the base of consent. That's why. And there's like all kind of little pieces of theory about limits, boundaries, about noticing, trusting what you're noticing, and all kind of fun exercises and games. And it's usually people do exercises together, and then they share in a pair around it, and then they share in a group if they want to, and this is sort of kind of co-creating awareness around these things. And also often when people share, many others sort of move their heads and sort of signaling that's exactly what I experienced as well, or I know this, I had also similar experiences. And of course, at the same time, people can have very, very different experiences. So it tries to normalize that the very same thing can be for somebody very pleasurable and for somebody else not pleasurable at all. And that's sort of also the core of consent, that there is no such thing as, it was not that bad or something, like that. It was just not what we agreed. When somebody does something else which was agreed, so there's no such thing as, at least not in a workshop setting, of course, on the streets, where it's always a discussion, what is boundaries, what is agreement, what is sort of normal, what is like kind of common norms and patterns. But here we try to practice it does this. Let's not speak about normal. Let's just ask as excited as possible what people want and what are they willing to do, and how are they willing to engage. That was a long speech.
No, that's all good. So most of the workshop is based around practice, right? I'm guessing there's more practicing than like dry theory.
Yes.
And you're just taking the exercises that are described in the book, and you're putting it to practice and then helping the participants experience these exercises in a correct way.
Exactly. And just maybe a word of correct and not correct. So I think even Betty Marty says that like you can take the wheel and adjust it how you want and do it differently, change it whatever you want, call it something else, and that's fine. But it's sort of the idea is that as long as it's sort of sold as the topic is the wheel of consent, Betty likes to have it in a certain way, which makes sense to me, because then it's like there's little nuances which are easily forgotten, So just an example, sometimes people add like active and passive. They just add it, or even male and female, which is even worse, I think. Like female quality, male quality, and this is just not the way Betty intended it. So because this idea of all the quadrants are sort of kind of actively choosing my limits and boundaries, because most of the time people connect like the word passive with something not having so much agency, right? But again, it's words are not easily defined, and it's not like it can be somebody who says no, when passive I mean something completely different. And also the idea of putting gender qualities into quadrants just don't go along with kind of equalitarian setup.
Yeah. And when you are facilitating these workshops, how many participants do you usually have at once? And do people usually come in pairs? Do they have a friend with them, or are there mostly like loners coming in?
So it's like most of the time it's like, let's say between 12 and 18 people. That's sort of most of the time. Sometimes there's limitations on the venue. So sometimes it's like, okay, it cannot be more than 12. And the experience is that if it's more than 18, it's usually way too much time, because I really like to have a space that people can share, like not as long as they want, but, have a few minutes to share. And the more people we have, and if it's a group where everybody likes to talk, then it's just so much time. And then it's really hard to because we share after each exercise, right? And then if it's a lot of more, like many more people than 18, I would need to either reduce the talking time or just make it longer workshop, or just kick some exercises out. So that has shown like 18 is like a useful limit. And in terms of couples and individuals, so it's usually a mix. There's usually, not always, but usually it's a mix of few couples and individuals. And I also tell people in advance they can choose to practice only with their partner, or they could switch, or they could change their mind again. And in terms of the clientele, it's a really mix of like some professionals come, so psychotherapists quite often, psychotherapists come, and other kind of people who work with other people, and individuals who come to practice for their private lives, and or both. Often it's like both, we can learn something but use it for our professional work, and also for our private life.
So let's say we have just stepped out of the workshop, or maybe we have just finished reading the book. How could we start applying the wheel of consent in everyday life, and also outside of the bedroom?
That's a very good question. I mean, I say sometimes, like if there, because it can be a lot input and a lot people learn, and say if you learn one thing, if you take one thing with you, could be this question, who is it for? And the second might be like, slow down, take a breath. But I don't try to push people into breathing, but it's like just a reminder, am I breathing? Take a pause. So when you get a question which is not comfortable, or is so comfortable that it makes you like butterflies and arousing, maybe it's too much for you in this moment. So sort of step back, either figuratively or really take a step back, and take your time to decide. So this is, I think, a good practice, because sometimes we are like, pushed. One of my examples is like when you're in a restaurant and, the waitress come and like, would you like something else? How was it? We often tend to say, oh, it was good, without even, we don't really mean it. We just, it's how it's done often. We just, how are you? Great, right? We don't really, it's a habit, it's a sort of ritual, and it's fine. But as an exercise, how would it be if you actually would feel into it for a few moments before you say, how was the meal? And how easy is it to say, most of the things are good, but this was a little bit too cold. Like have a little, there could be one suggestion, or like anywhere else. It's just worth asking, who is it really for? And often the question of how easy is it to adjust and to say no. And I'm not saying we have to now always adjust super precise, because it's not always possible. In a job, when I'm employed somewhere, I cannot always super adjust what the boss tells me to do, right? So, or we know that there will be consequences most of the time. They can be nice, but they may not be so pleasant. So we say no, and it can be like consequence that the person just walks away, right? Because they haven't been in the workshop, So always remind people also to be careful and to be slow with conscious how they apply it, because often people are so excited about this new thing, the wheel of consent, that they think, oh, I want to show it to everybody, and I want to apply it right away. And it's a great intention. It's just, they will see how it works, because they had like almost 3 days to learn it, and other people, as we've seen before, it's not always easy to explain it in a few sentences and expect that people will understand, that people will have the ability to say no. So you ask something, and then they go, well, like, what, this question is overreaching, it's like harassment. And you say, come on, I just learned, I can ask anything. So the context is also important, right? And the question of, is it useful to do it here?
Yeah, I think that just by asking the question, who is this for, is such a great start, because that's like a thing you can think about in any situation. For example, you're planning to go on an event, or I don't know, maybe go for a run with your friend. You're invited, or you invite a friend yourself, and you can ask, like, who is this for? Like, if I were to answer, sure, let's go, or I don't want to go, then who is this for? Or if you're, I don't know, helping somebody, you're washing your boyfriend's dishes.
Yeah.
You're thinking like, I freaking hate this. Why am I doing this? I just want the house to be nice and clean. But then maybe your boyfriend might be thinking that, it's so nice that she's doing this for me, because that's how she shows affection. So I think it's a great question to think through in whatever you're doing. And I think it's a great start.
Yeah, exactly. And maybe it's like, instead of having expectations which we don't voice, just ask nicely, right? Because sometimes we just do expect things and just maybe never, or at this moment just don't say it. And then, so how will it be to clarify? So, okay, I'm gonna do the dishes, but would you do this something else for me if we feel we need a balance, right? Like, because at the end of the day, I think that usually we do have a need for some kind of balance, right? In friendship, relationship, job, it's like, okay, I do the work, I get money, right? So, but and the feeling of it's not balanced is valid. And then is the question, well, is it like, is the problem in, like, not problem, but is it like the feeling is welcome, but okay, what was the agreement, right? Because sometimes we have expectations and we just never said we need something, and so the person cannot read our minds.
Yeah. And also, like, I think a good place to start is just saying what you're thinking. Let's say, again, I'm coming back to, like, maybe you're planning to do something shared with, let's say, your friend. I like the example that you brought about the hike when I joined your introductory call. And the example was that, when your friend invites you to a hike, you you don't really want to go, maybe it's a long hike, it's not really for you, but you're doing it for them, right? So it's important in that situation, it's important for you to say that, hey, I don't really enjoy this. I don't really enjoy hiking. And if you weren't here, I wouldn't be doing this. But I choose to do this for you. So everybody understands who is receiving a gift, basically. And so there wouldn't be like misunderstandings in the future.
Yeah.
So yeah, just basically, as always, it always boils down to communication.
Exactly. And understanding, and it's, my experience is it's really not always easy to know what people mean, because now there's a whole book about a certain topic, and we define, like, communication has something to do with, we define first what we mean. If you mean it's for me, but if people don't know the concept, they're really confused, and they get even angry because they just not used to it. They're just not used to it. It's like when you uncover like some dynamics in society, be it like racism, sexism. If people don't have the concept of it, they often react that they reject the whole idea. They say, no, I'm not doing it. I'm not racist, sexist, all these things, but they don't even listen first, right? They're not listening how the experience of somebody else is. And I think that's also a very important thing, that even with the best intention, when I have a request, I have, even like with the example of the hike, it could be that I ask you for a long hike and the question itself is horrible for you because maybe you have had some not so pleasant experience in a long hike and it's just so present for you. And I didn't know. So I try to normalize that I assume good intentions of people, but it's always valid that you react in a way you need to react. And I think we should practice that I take it sort of in a respectful way. Right? So okay, it's not my fault that it caused sort of emotion in you, my question, but it's totally, it's okay. It's I respect that it did. And in a way, I would also hope that you also don't blame me for it, that I made you feel uncomfortable. It's like, sometimes it's like a misunderstanding, right? Sometimes it's like consent accident. At the same time, sometimes it's clear. Like I try not to like victim blame, or I try not to, sort of turn things around, which also happens quite a lot in society, that we blame others, but it's like, it's a question, can we look at it first?
I feel like we are coming closer to the end of this episode, but before we completely stop, I would like to talk about the book a bit more.
Sure.
Who do you think would benefit the most from this book? Who do you recommend this book to? Is it for professionals only? Is it for everybody?
I think it's basically for everybody. I mean, like I know, many professionals read it, many people who use it individually. I think it can be like, consent seems to be such a general topic to learn, and then it's up to the people how they apply it. So I think it's kind of very universal. And I mean, there's like, there were in the English edition, there were chapters which were left out. They can be purchased. I think purchased separately, like some, because the book would have been too big. I don't know if the Estonian edition has included them. In the Czech edition, they're all included, so which makes it even bigger, bigger book. And yeah,
I agree. I am the one who has to sell the book in Estonia, because I published it in Estonian as well, and I read the book and I was thinking, like, who would be the people to target. And like, once again, I have to say, like, everybody would benefit from reading this book. And it might sound cliche, because the books that we have published before, I would recommend the previous books to everybody as well, because I feel like literally everybody would benefit from these. Like, it doesn't matter which profession you have or how old you are, or if you have kids or you don't have kids, or what pronouns you have or whatever. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, consent is just such an important topic to grasp and to understand. And I seriously recommend everybody read this book. And I think that probably like from 16 and up, you will understand these topics. It might be a bit difficult to, grasp when you're younger than that. Maybe it would be nice if maybe your parents or, I don't know, older siblings taught you that. But otherwise, I would say go read it, go grab it and go read it.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's like, it's certainly reading a book, it can start in a certain age. But the topic of consent, I mean, I get this question a lot after the workshop. That people say like, oh, we should have all learned it in school.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is sort of true. But I don't, like, I'm not a teacher. I'm not like a pedagogue. So it's not, it's a certain way of it would need to be adjusted, right?
Mm-hmm.
The topic and the question of touches can be tricky in school, and you need consent of parents, which is all great and needed. It's like a safe space for them. But I think parents can totally play the 3-minute game with their children, right? Or children between themselves. How would you like? And it doesn't have to be touch. It has to be, what kind of game do we play now? And then kids negotiate. Okay, 10 minutes this, 10 minutes this, and then no, let's do 5 minutes. So like negotiating what kids would do, play, draw, or parents could to offer, which they do often. They offer like, what would you like to do? Do we go to the zoo? Do we go to the cinema? Do we, what do we do? And children can learn how is it to have a choice, and also that choice, it's not always possible. Like, children just cannot do whatever they want, right? If they want to walk over a red light, it's an interesting request, but the answer will probably be no. And it's also a good way of, I think it's for everyone, also for us, we also cannot just do whatever we want anytime, all the time, right? So it's like, okay, that's like in the workshop. This is a field we are playing here. We stay clothed, we do it for a few days, we do it for 3 minutes, like in general, the whole workshop, but we do the exercise for 3 minutes. And this is important. Sometimes I forget when sometimes it's like 5 or 7 minutes. And sometimes I forget to say that before people group up. And that's a good example, because some people say, oh, wait a minute, 7 minutes? I would choose other person for 7 minutes. I thought it's 3 minutes. And it's totally valid. It matters, right? And I think with children or young people, it can be totally practiced. What's the field of where can they choose from? And within that, they can choose from, and request is always welcome. Not always will they get what they want, right? That's the whole raising children all about, right? Like, how do they learn limits with sort of an open heart, saying no without them feeling rejected? And sometimes this has also to do how we learn it as children, how we will apply these dynamics later as adults. Like Betty Martin, I don't know if it's in the book, but this dynamics where it, at least when I was small, was quite common, that people would just pet you on the head, in a way, oh, cute little boy, and they would just touch you. I mean, not necessarily people like on the street, but like relatives, friends of your parents. And I think, or my observation is that this has changed. People ask way more, or children are taught way more to say no to this and to take care of their bodies. And I think this is great. This can be done as soon as it's possible. Yeah. So they own their body. Yeah.
Yeah, like that's what I also noticed. That's kind of how we introduced the book as well. Is like our past kind of defines why we are scared to say what we want, and also we don't know what we want, because from whenever we were children, we were told to ignore our limits and our wishes, And exactly as you said, like me as a young girl, I also had to let other like strangers pet my hair because I was so blonde and cute and whatever. But now it's kind of up for me. Do I keep doing the same things to, I don't know, my sister's kids? Or am I actually like, do I now notice these patterns and I stop doing them and I ask before I do? Because children are not just like cute little versions of us. They're people.
Yeah.
And so when you think about you in the past and who you are today, who you were before finding Betty's book and who you are now, what has been your biggest personal learning from doing this work?
Oh, wow. That's a biggie. There's so many things. I'm gonna pick a few. One of the thing is probably learning to resist immediate answer. Practicing learning to say like, okay, wow, I need 2 minutes. This is like an internal dialogue. I get a question, request, and it's like, okay, I need a moment to process that and not say yes or no right away or make something up or have a like, in German it's the word Notlüge. It's like an emergency lie. We call it, I don't know really in English, but it's like you just make something up so you don't have to say no.
Mm-hmm.
And you make up an excuse. So this is certainly big. Also learn that this is intimidating for some, like this is irritating. Taking a pause. People don't trust that. They're like, oh, what's going on? You don't know. They require a quick answer. They have this thing of, oh, it should be authentic, so it should be quick. And the other is certainly slowing down. It's a little bit similar. It's like, how is it to slow down? And then, oh yeah, that's a big one. Not knowing is okay. Also not knowing. So I'm not sure. It's yes, you see, it's actually all very similar. It's like taking time to decide, and then it can be a big yes, can be a big no, or maybe I just don't know at this moment. And at the same time, I think learned not to be ashamed of my desire. It's like both, like being more comfortable with what I really want, trying to be aware of the context. So it's not everywhere I can ask and think of people, right? And at the same time, be more comfortable of saying no to things in a nice way or in a way where it's received hopefully well. And it does not always work.
That's cool. Well, in that case, Ondra, where can people find you and your work?
Well, I'm based in Berlin most of the time. I offer this workshops in let me think, in Germany. It's Berlin, Hamburg, Düsseldorf, which is close to Köln, and Munich at this moment. I also in German language. I also offer it every year in Brussels in English, and in May for the first time in Czech in Prague. And and I'm open to travel anywhere else to if there's a need for workshops. Yeah.
Great. Is there anything else you would like to add?
Yeah, maybe start small and slow. Yeah.
And by reading the book, hopefully.
Yeah.
Okay, well, Betty's book, Saamise, andmise, kunst, is available in our online store, print.ee now. And of course, you can find it in also the bigger bookstores in Rahva Raamat and Apollo. And we're kind of hoping to bring Ondra to Estonia to experience his 2.5-day Wheel of Consent workshop. So subscribe to our newsletter and follow our social media, of course, to stay tuned on the dates. And thank you so much, Ondra, for taking the time out of your busy schedule to discuss such important topic as consent is. And hopefully our listeners learn something and have more courage to ask for what they really want. And I also thank you, our listener, for taking the time to join us. And I'll see you in the next episode.
Thank you very much, Annalise. It was really a pleasure being here. And looking forward to more collaboration. Bye-bye.
Bye.